There are men who seem sculpted by history rather than born into it. Henry William Dalglish, Cavill belongs to that rare kind. His story is not a tale of overnight fame or effortless destiny. It is a slow, deliberate march, a testament to discipline, dignity, and the kind of inner strength the modern world rarely celebrates. He was not created by applause, but refined by adversity. The road that shaped him was long, unglamorous, and often lonely, yet it built something the fleeting light of fame could never diminish: character. He came into the world on the island of Jersey, where the air carries the scent of the sea and the rhythm of old British resolve. The boy who would grow into a global symbol of strength began quietly, shy, thoughtful, observing the world more than speaking to it. His home was a place of order, principle, and structure. His father's discipline and his mother's warmth formed the two pillars upon which he would build his life. The Cavill household was not rich in luxury, but rich in lessons of integrity, endurance, and respect for the dignity of hard work. As a child, Henry was not the loudest or the boldest. He was the one who watched, who studied, who learned. He understood early that greatness does not shout, it listens first. There were hardships, as there always are in the shaping of a young man's soul. He was tested by isolation, challenged by insecurity, and taught by the quiet ache of being misunderstood. Yet from those early trials, a seed was planted, the seed of endurance. While others sought comfort, he grew comfortable in discomfort. While others wished to be seen, he learned to wait until he was ready to be noticed. From the island shores to the wider world, his steps carried the weight of quiet purpose. He was never the prodigy with instant success. He was the craftsman, chiseling his own destiny stroke by stroke. In London, among millions chasing the same elusive dream, he encountered the harsh reality of ambition. Doors closed, opportunities vanished. He and doubts crept in. But Henry did not curse the struggle. He studied it. He treated rejection as education, silence as motivation. The grind became his teacher and persistence his companion. He learned something vital in those years of obscurity, that the world does not owe recognition and that mastery demands patience. There is a kind of strength that comes only from standing alone, from facing the uncertainty of a life without guarantees. Cavill faced it head on, not with arrogance, but with quiet defiance. He began to understand that manhood, real manhood, is not defined by status, but by how one behaves when no one is watching. Every disappointment became a rehearsal for composure, every setback a test of will. And slowly the world began to notice the steadiness behind the silence. Fame, when it came, did not change him. It revealed him. Many rise quickly and fall faster, consumed by the glare of their own reflection. Cavill, however, carried fame the way a knight carries armor, with respect, restraint, and the constant awareness of its weight. The discipline that guided his youth became the foundation of his adulthood. He did not chase attention, he earned it through consistency. To him, success was not a destination, but a duty, a daily practice of self-mastery. There were temptations, of course, the noise, the distractions, the endless lure of indulgence, but he remained steady. The boy from Jersey who learned to find strength in solitude grew into a man who could stand calm in the eye of chaos. In a world obsessed with spectacle, he chose sincerity. In an age that rewards impulsiveness, he prized control. This is what set him apart, not luck, but the refusal to lose himself. His journey became less about what he achieved and more about what he became through the pursuit. Strength, discipline, and composure were not performances, they were principles. He built not an image, but an identity forged in the oldest tradition of manhood endurance. He understood that the truest victories are often invisible, the moments when one chooses integrity over convenience, respect over vanity, principle over applause. Through the years, Cavill became a living reminder that true confidence is quiet. He did not need to prove his worth through words, because his presence spoke for him. His poise, his humility, his measured grace, these became rare currencies in a culture addicted to noise. He carried himself with the air of a man who knows that power without discipline is chaos and fame without honor is emptiness. But beneath the composure lay the same restless fire, the hunger to keep evolving. He refused to settle into comfort. He trained not only his body, but his mind and soul, believing that discipline is the purest form of freedom. The world saw the results. But what it did not see were the countless mornings of repetition, the hours of pain, the patience that builds real strength. He understood that mastery is never achieved, it is maintained every day in silence. And yet, for all the success, Henry Cavill's story is not one of perfection. It is a story of balance between pride and humility. Solitude and connection, strength and compassion. He is not a myth, but a man, one who bleeds doubts, reflects, and rises again. That humanity is what makes his journey timeless. He shows that greatness is not a crown one wears, but a standard one upholds, even when no one notices. As years passed and the weight of public expectation grew heavier, Cavill chose to move differently. Where others sought the spotlight, he sought solitude. Where others clung to attention, he retreated to reflection. He began to embody a philosophy older than fame itself, that a man's first and last duty is to himself, to remain whole in a world that constantly demands fragments. He learned that silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. That to stand firm in one's truth, even quietly, is a louder act of rebellion than any outburst. He became a symbol not of rebellion, but of refinement. The calm strength of his demeanor reminded the world that dignity is not outdated, it is eternal. His life became an echo of values long forgotten: restraint, responsibility, gratitude. These were not lessons from the industry, but from his upbringing from the island winds that once whispered humility into a young boy's heart. And so his story continues, not as a closed chapter, but as an evolving testament to endurance. He remains the man who stands firm when others waver, the one who knows that fame fades, but honor remains. In a time where so many chase validation, he teaches the virtue of patience. In an age of noise, he teaches the beauty of stillness. Perhaps that is why his journey resonates so deeply, because beneath the muscle, beneath the poise, lies something profoundly human: the desire to build a life of meaning, not merely of recognition. Henry Cavill reminds us that true greatness is quiet, and that strength, real strength, is never loud. It is found in the calm, in the discipline, in the refusal to compromise one's values, even when the world demands surrender. In the end, history will not remember him merely for what he did, but for how he did it, with grace, with honor, and with an unwavering devotion to self-mastery. His life stands as proof that one can walk through the chaos of the modern world and still emerge whole. That one can succeed without losing humility, can rise without forgetting the ground beneath his feet. Henry Cavill's journey is not just the story of a man, it is the quiet manifesto of an era longing for integrity. It tells us that while fame may glitter, it is discipline that shines, that while applause may fade, character endures. And that in the stillness of one's own conscience, where no camera reaches, true greatness is decided. Because in the end, the measure of a man is not in the roar of the crowd, but in the silence he commands when he stands alone. And Henry Cavill, the boy from Jersey, has shown the world that strength need not shout to be eternal. It simply needs to stand. There comes a point in every man's life when his belief in himself is weighed against the world's disbelief. For Henry Cavill, that test arrived not as one dramatic moment, but as a long, drawn-out trial of patience. The world saw only the surface, auditions lost, roles that slipped away, faces that replaced his indecisions made behind closed doors. But what no one saw was the quiet war that raged within him. He was a man of classical conviction trapped in a modern industry that often celebrates chaos over consistency. In an age obsessed with speed, he chose endurance. He endured the waiting, the uncertainty, the grinding repetition of effort that yielded little in return. Each rejection, each disappointment became another layer of armor forged in silence. The fire of ambition is bright, but without discipline, It burns the man who carries it. Cavill understood this, and so he tempered it, turning frustration into fuel. The lessons of his youth, the order of his father, the calm resolve of his mother, began to reveal their purpose. They had prepared him not for ease, but for struggle. He had been taught that dignity is not granted by success. It is revealed in failure. That belief, simple but profound, became his compass. He would not curse the darkness. He would learn to see in it. In the small apartments and narrow hallways of early life, he confronted the truths that separate the dreamers from the doers. The dreamers wait for permission. The doers, they keep moving. Henry chose movement, not the frantic motion of panic, but the deliberate, disciplined steps of a man who knows that destiny bends only to those who refuse to yield. He began to view his life not as a chase for recognition, but as a craft to be perfected. Every audition, whether it ended in success or silence, became a lesson in composure. Every encounter, whether kind or cruel, tested his ability to remain grounded. He understood that the industry could strip away opportunities, but not self-respect, not unless he surrendered it willingly. As the years passed, something remarkable happened. His failures began to shape him more than success ever could. They sculpted patience, sharpened humility, and deepened empathy. He came to embody the quiet truth that life's rejections are often divine redirections, steering the worthy toward what they are meant to endure before they are meant to lead. He was learning a form of wisdom that cannot be taught in classrooms or learned from mentors. It is the kind of wisdom that comes only from walking through fire without resentment. That calm, measured demeanor that would later define him was not an act. It was earned. Each time life tested him, he chose grace over bitterness, effort over excuse. The city around him roared, a million ambitions colliding in every street, every building, every audition room. But within him was a silence more powerful than noise, the silence of focus. He trained his body, honed his mind, studied history, philosophy, and leadership, not for appearance, but for understanding. He wanted to know what makes men endure. What separates momentary fame from lasting influence? In that period of struggle, he built the foundation for the man he would become. While others were chasing the surface, he was building depth. While others sought shortcuts, he accepted the long road. There were nights when doubt crept in like fog, whispering that his sacrifices might be in vain. But he did not listen. He believed that the world eventually bows to those who remain unshaken. And so, even in the midst of uncertainty, he carried himself with composure. His bearing, upright, quiet, unflinching, began to speak louder than his words. People noticed something different in him, though they couldn't yet define it. It was the aura of a man who knew that his worth was not determined by the opinions of others. The truth is, adversity introduces a man to himself, and in those years, Henry Cavill met himself fully. The strong and the fragile, the confident and the uncertain. He faced every shadow without pretending they weren't there. That honesty with himself became the cornerstone of his strength. He was not pretending to be fearless. He was simply refusing to be ruled by fear. Life began to respond slowly, subtly. Opportunities came not as grand gifts, but as tests. Each one demanded more endurance, more refinement, more mastery. But by then he was ready, because the man who has learned to wait without breaking is already invincible. When the world finally turned its eyes toward him, he was no longer the uncertain boy from Jersey. He had become something far rarer, a man anchored by principle, unshaken by chaos, and guided by a quiet certainty that whatever came next, he would face it on his own terms. And that, perhaps, is the essence of Henry Cavill's journey, the transformation of waiting into wisdom, of struggle into substance. He did not ask life for ease. He asked it for strength. And strength, though it took years to arrive, never leaves the man who earns it. In the mirror of those hard years, he learned what true victory looks like, not fame, not fortune, but mastery over the self, the kind of mastery that cannot be bought, taught, or imitated. the kind of mastery that radiates through silence, a man fully aware of who he is and who he refuses to become. There are moments in life when the struggle ends not with a sudden triumph, but with a quiet shift, when preparation meets opportunity, and the years of patience reveal their purpose. For Henry Cavill, that turning point arrived not with fanfare, but with focus. The world, once indifferent to his persistence, began to take notice of his presence. A presence that carried weight not because of spectacle, but because of discipline. And if he, in a culture obsessed with shortcuts, he had chosen the long road. While others sought to be seen, he had learned the power of invisibility, to work in silence until the work itself speaks. The discipline of those unseen years had refined him into something formidable. He had not only built his skill, but fortified his spirit. Now, when opportunities came, he stood ready, not as a hopeful beginner, but as a craftsman who had earned his tools through endurance. His composure began to draw attention. There was something about his stillness that unsettled the frantic pace of those around him. He did not scramble for approval, nor did he chase validation. Instead, he embodied an older form of confidence, the kind that does not demand recognition, but commands it naturally. People began to sense in him a rare quality balance, a man who could carry strength without arrogance, humility without weakness. Fame began to find him, but fame is a test disguised as reward. For every door it opens, it tempts the soul with distraction. Many are consumed by it, few remain intact. Henry treated it like the weight it truly was, heavy, demanding, and never to be trusted. He had seen what fame did to others, how it distorts identity, breeds entitlement, and feeds the ego until nothing genuine remains. He refused to let that happen. He approached success the way a soldier approaches duty, with respect and vigilance. Every opportunity was met with preparation, every accolade with humility. The applause never reached his head because his roots were too deep. The boy from Jersey, once mocked and doubted, carried with him the lessons of solitude, that identity must never depend on attention, and that dignity is a man's last line of defense in a world that constantly seeks to buy it. His daily life became a meditation on consistency. He rose early, trained hard, and lived with order. Where others saw physical strength, he saw self-discipline made visible. Every repetition, every hour of practice, every quiet refusal of comfort was an act of defiance against laziness, against chaos, against the erosion of one's will. He was not building a body, he was building a temple of focus. But beneath that precision, there remained a softness, a deep gratitude for where he came from, for the values that kept him grounded. He often spoke of his family not as symbols of nostalgia, but as anchors of identity. They reminded him that success means nothing if one forgets where the journey began. His brothers, his parents, his island, they were the invisible spine behind the visible man. Still, success brings with it new forms of trial. For the man who once struggled to be seen, now came the burden of being watched. Every choice was scrutinized, every word dissected. The same world that cheers can turn with the tide. But Henry Cavill had long learned the futility of chasing public favor. He focused instead on the only thing that endures, self-respect. He would rather be misunderstood in truth than celebrated in pretense. And so, while the noise of fame rose around him, he built silence within himself. That inner stillness became his strength. It gave him clarity when the world blurred with opinions, composure when others crumbled under pressure. In that silence, he could hear what truly mattered, the quiet voice of purpose that no crowd can amplify or silence. He began to understand the difference between achievement and fulfillment. Achievement is external, measured in awards, roles, and recognition. Fulfillment is internal, measured in peace, integrity, and growth. He had achieved much, but what sustained him was the deeper fulfillment of knowing that he had earned it the right way, without compromise. This philosophy began to shape how he lived and how he led. He became an example, not through speeches or slogans, but through behavior. younger men looked to him and saw a model of strength that wasn't reckless, of ambition that wasn't selfish. In an era where masculinity was often caricatured, he embodied its truest form, disciplined, humble, protective, and principled. To him, honor was not an outdated word, it was a code. It meant doing what is right even when no one is watching, and standing firm even when standing firm is costly. It meant saying less and doing more. That is why those who truly observe him sense something timeless, as if he carries the echoes of a vanished era where men were defined not by what they possessed, but by what they refused to compromise. Through fame's temptations and success's illusions, he held his ground. He learned that the higher one climbs, the more important humility becomes, for humility is the only thing that keeps a man human when the world begins to treat him like a god. And so he kept his circle small, his habits steady, his conscience clear in every interview, every appearance, every interaction. There was a calmness that came not from confidence alone, but from perspective. He had seen both sides of fortune, the lean years of struggle and the blinding glare of fame, and he knew that neither defined him. He remained, at his core, the same man who once walked the cliffs of Jersey dreaming of a life beyond the horizon. The world around him kept changing, louder, faster, more uncertain, but he did not. He stayed steady, as if reminding those who watched that constancy is still possible in an age of distraction. His was not the energy of ambition unchecked, but a purpose fulfilled quietly. He moved not to impress, but to improve, not to dominate, but to master himself. And that, perhaps, is the rarest kind of greatness, the kind that grows more silent as it becomes more real. As the years passed, something subtle yet profound began to happen. The world no longer looked at Henry Cavill as just an actor or a star. He had become something larger, something rarer, a symbol of a vanishing kind of manhood, not loud, not performative, but disciplined, composed, and quietly unbreakable. People began to sense that beneath the image, beneath the armor, the physique, the fame, there was a principle. A man who believed that honor, effort, and integrity were not negotiable values, and in a culture built on shortcuts and self-promotion, that made him almost revolutionary. He never called himself a role model. That was never his intention. But in a time when many sought influence, he sought substance. He didn't preach, he lived, and that made his example louder than any sermon. He showed that discipline isn't punishment. It's freedom, that patience isn't weakness, it's mastery of time, and that humility isn't submission, it's strength under control. Every action, every choice became part of a larger philosophy, to move through the world with respect, restraint, and resolve. Behind every achievement was a routine, not glamorous, not public, but sacred. Early mornings, quiet training, preparation that no one saw but everyone felt. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. About showing up again and again, even when no one is watching. Especially then, in that repetition, in that solitude, he found something many spend their lives chasing: peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of clarity. The peace that comes when a man knows exactly who he is and what he refuses to become. But peace never lasts without challenge. The world, as it always does, tested him again. With fame came expectations to fit narratives, to play politics, to surrender individuality for the sake of popularity. Many around him conformed. He did not. He spoke carefully, not because he feared controversy, but because he understood the cost of careless words. And when he did speak, he chose honesty over applause. In a time where people weaponized opinions, he chose reason. In a time where everyone shouted, he chose to think. That restraint, that refusal to join the noise, made him stand out even more. The very stillness that once made him invisible now became his signature. In the chaos of the modern world, he moved with the calm of a man who owed nothing to it. He learned that freedom is not doing whatever one wants. It's having the strength to do only what is right. And right in his eyes was never decided by trends or crowds, but by conscience. He knew that fame fades, that applause echoes briefly and dies. What lasts is the trail one leaves behind, the quiet influence of a life lived with integrity. And that, more than any role, became his legacy in motion. The discipline that once built his body had built something far greater, a mind that could not be swayed and a soul that could not be bought. And in an industry often driven by vanity and volatility, that made him almost mythic. He became a reminder that it is possible to succeed without surrender, that one can rise without arrogance, lead without ego, and remain grounded without losing ambition. When others sought validation, he sought mastery. When they chased relevance, he chased excellence. And in doing so, he found something they never could: permanence. Because excellence, unlike fame, doesn't fade, it endures. Yet through it all, he remained human, vulnerable, introspective, aware of his own flaws. That awareness became his balance. He never claimed invincibility, he pursued improvement. Every setback was a signal, every failure a teacher. He had learned long ago that the difference between those who endure and those who vanish isn't talent, it's endurance. And endurance is not just surviving, it's refining. It's continuing forward when the world has stopped clapping, when the lights are gone, and all that remains is the question, who are you when no one's watching? For Henry Cavill, that question became his compass. And every choice, every act of restraint, every repetition in solitude was his answer. That is why, even as his career expanded, he never lost himself in it. The fame, the acclaim, they were chapters, not identity. His real success wasn't the screen, it was the man behind it, the quiet strength, the steadiness, the discipline that cannot be staged. He once said that the greatest battles are fought within. He meant it. And that belief turned his entire life into proof that self-mastery is the highest form of power, and that the only throne worth sitting on is the one you build within yourself. He became, in essence, a paradox, a man who conquered the world by not letting it conquer him. Time has a way of humbling even the mightiest. It strips away illusion, leaving only what is real. Fame fades, beauty shifts, applause dies, but character, that rarest of currencies, endures. And Henry Cavill's story had become precisely that, the story of a man who outlasted the illusions of his own era. The longer the world watched him, the clearer it became that his greatness wasn't loud or extravagant. It wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on stillness, on the unshakable foundation of a man who refused to be anything other than himself. He became a mirror of what people quietly missed: authenticity. In a time when everything could be faked, he remained genuine. When sincerity became outdated, he made it noble again. This was not an accident. It was the consequence of conviction. The conviction that one's worth should never be measured in numbers, but in truth. That the man you are in private must match the man the world believes you to be. And that when the world demands you bend, the greatest act of defiance is to stand still. In that stillness he found power, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that steadies. The power that comes from knowing your principles cannot be bought or borrowed. And people felt that. Across nations and languages, audiences recognized something in him that transcended cinema, a spirit they had nearly forgotten. A quiet kind of heroism, stripped of the spotlight, defined not by image but by essence. As the world accelerated, chasing trends, he breaking itself into fragments, he slowed down, he spoke less, listened more. He understood that wisdom does not shout over chaos. It observes it, understands it, and walks through it untouched. He had grown into something beyond celebrity. He was becoming archetype, the modern echo of an ancient ideal, the virtuous man. The man who carries weight with calm, who does not confuse humility with weakness, nor strength with cruelty. His journey was not a straight line. It was a spiral, returning to lessons he had already learned, each time deeper, clearer, more meaningful. He came to see that success was never a peak, but a circle, a return to simplicity, to authenticity, to gratitude. That quiet, almost invisible force guided him. Gratitude for those who believed when he was still unknown. Gratitude for struggle, for it had forged his discipline. Gratitude even for failure, for it had taught him empathy. This was what gave his presence gravity. You could feel it, even in silence, that deep gratitude woven into the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. And as life offered him comfort, he refused to become comfortable. He kept his edge sharp, his purpose clear. Because he understood that comfort is the enemy of growth, and ease the enemy of excellence. He had watched many lose themselves to comfort, to the applause, to the endless chase of validation. But he had also seen what happens when a man resists it, when he chooses meaning over pleasure, craft over fame, truth over convenience. That resistance became his quiet rebellion, not against others, but against the decay of values, against mediocrity, against the world's obsession with shortcuts. He believed that a man's dignity lies in his effort, not in the outcome, not in the credit, but in the act itself. To try, and to try well, is to honor life. And through that belief, he had become something the modern world rarely produces anymore. Standard, a reminder that being grounded is not the opposite of greatness. It is the foundation of it. He reminded the world that real strength is not dominance, but restraint. That true leadership is not command, but example. And that legacy is not built in noise, but in silence, in the thousands of unseen choices that define a life. Those who met him often said he carried a kind of calm that was contagious, as if he had already made peace with the chaos others were still trying to escape. That calm wasn't arrogance, it was earned serenity, the product of facing life directly, without illusion. Because he had learned something most never do, that peace is not found by avoiding struggle, but by mastering it. He knew, too, that time would move on, that the faces of fame would change, that one day even his image would belong to history, and he accepted that. Because he wasn't building for applause, he was building for endurance. He didn't seek to be remembered as flawless, but as steadfast, as a man who in every season remained true. And that is the essence of legacy. Not a monument carved in stone, but a quiet resonance in the hearts of those who witness you live with conviction. In this way, Henry Cavill's story transcended entertainment. It became a reflection of the timeless question every generation must face. What does it mean to be a man of principle in an age without anchors? His answer was never written or declared, it was lived. And that is why his story endures not as a myth, but as a mirror, showing every listener that greatness at its core begins with integrity, as all great journeys must. His story moves toward silence, not ending, but a transformation. For what endures of any man is not the sound of his voice, but the echo of his actions. And Henry Cavill's echo does not fade easily. It lives in the rhythm of his choices, in the steadiness of his example. In the quiet way, he reminds the world that greatness is not something you perform. It is something you become. History will remember many faces, many names. But what sets a few apart is the spirit that threads through their existence, that rare alignment of discipline, humility, and heart. Cavill's spirit, though born in a time of spectacle, resisted spectacle. He did not chase noise, he built presence. Presence, that ancient quality no camera can fake. The aura that comes from alignment when a man's words, actions, and beliefs all move in one direction. That is what made him timeless. Not the image, not the fame, but the coherence between his inner and outer world. He lived as though every day were both gift and test. A chance to refine, to learn, to hold his ground. And as years turned and chapters closed, that constancy became his quiet immortality. For immortality is not about being remembered by millions. It's about being remembered truly by a few. Those whose lives are steadied, even in small ways, because you existed. And in that sense, Henry Cavill lives on far beyond screens, beyond interviews, beyond the stories told about him. He lives on in the man who decides to endure rather than complain, in the young person who learns that discipline is not punishment but devotion, in anyone who looks at the world's chaos and chooses calm, who faces defeat and stands again. This is his legacy, not fame but fortitude, not influence but integrity, not adoration but authenticity. He showed that you can walk through the fire of expectation and come out not hardened, but clarified. That you can bear weight without bitterness and power without pride. That the highest honor is not applause, but self-respect. And though his journey began as one man's pursuit of purpose, it became something universal, a reflection of what we all seek meaning. To know that our lives are not wasted on noise, that what we build within ourselves can outlast the years. There is something deeply human in his story, not the victories, not the fame, but the resolve, the refusal to surrender to cynicism, the courage to be genuine in a world that rewards performance. He became proof that manhood, stripped of ego, still has poetry in it. That grace and strength, once thought opposites, can live together in balance. Even now, as the world changes and attention shifts, his image lingers like a silhouette, calm, steadfast, unshaken, a reminder that greatness does not need to shout. It stands silent and immovable while the world rushes by, and so his story closes not with triumph or tragedy, but with stillness, the stillness of a man who has done what few ever do, become whole. There is no final applause here, no ending scene. Only the quiet truth that remains after all noise has faded, that the measure of a life is not in how loudly it is lived, but how deeply it is understood. For Henry Cavill, the journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about becoming entirely himself. And perhaps that is the most difficult, most heroic journey of all, to walk through a world of imitation and remain authentic. To face the mirror each morning and find peace, not pretense. To give your best effort even when no one will ever know. That is legacy. That is mastery. That is manhood in its highest form, not conquest, but composure. And so his story does not end. It continues quietly in those who watch and remember not just the man on screen, but the man behind it, the soul that refused to be compromised. For some stories blaze brightly and vanish. Others burn slowly, enduring long after the flame has dimmed. Henry Cavill's is the latter. A story not of spectacle, but of strength, not of perfection, but of persistence. And as time moves forward, his name will not just be recalled as that of an actor, but as a testament that even in an age of noise and haste, there was one man who proved that dignity, discipline, and decency still had a place in the human story. He will be remembered not for what he played, but for what he embodied. Not for what he said, but for what he stood for. Because the greatest men do not need monuments, they become them.